Welcome to Non-Traditional Pathways to the C-Suite. This session will begin soon.
Hello and welcome to our session. We are joined today by Dara Klein, who is the perfect person to lead off this conversation on non-traditional pathways to the C-suite. She's an accomplished executive search leader and board advisor that has served in the financial services industry and growth company sectors, and she has a wealth of expertise in talent assessment. So without further ado, Dara, I will turn it over to you.
Brittany, thank you very much. It's nice to see you again, and I'm very happy to be joined by my colleagues, Jennifer McCullum, Ivy Kasinga, and Kimber Matarazzo, and they're joining us here. I'd love to tell you a little bit about each. Jennifer is the CEO of Linkage, Inc., a 34-year-old leadership development firm whose mission is to change the face of leadership. They work with organizations globally to advance women and accelerate inclusion in leaders and organizations. Jennifer is a CEO, a keynote speaker, consultant, author, and executive coach, and has 20 plus years of experience building and leading businesses in the leadership space. Her expertise includes the state of women in the workforce, how to close the gender equity gap, and why most effective leaders are inclusive leaders, and how to demystify inclusion for leaders and organizations. Jennifer, welcome. Ivy Kasinga is the Chief Culture Officer at Chubb, a global P&C insurer serving large corporate, mid-market, small business, and lower middle to high net worth consumers through brokerage, agency, and direct-to-consumer distribution channels. Ivy partners with business and functional leaders to strengthen Chubb's culture and provide an inclusive, equitable environment that enables high performance. Additionally, Ivy works with leadership teams across Chubb to support Chubb's focus on attracting, developing, and retaining talent. Prior to this role, Ivy led talent management functions for Chubb North America and worked for Chubb Overseas General as VP Business Development, International Accident and Health. Ivy, welcome. Kimber Matarazzo is chairman of the board for C200, a powerful community of the most successful women in business, representing companies with more than 1.4 trillion in combined revenue and employing more than 2.5 million people. Kimber spent most of her career managing the world's #1 acne brand, Proactiv. She is an operating advisor for private equity companies and the founder of Millie Rose Beauty. Good to see everyone. I'm happy to be with all of you.
Thanks for having us.
Fantastic. We're gonna get right into our session here, and I have questions for all of you, and I'd love to ask each of you these questions. It's going to be fun, and I'm excited to hear what you all have to say. So let me get into the first question. So we shared with the audience a synopsis of your bio and the role you are in today. Is this the role that you aspire to? Is this what you expected in your career? Kimber, let's start with you.
Sure. So when you ask, is it the role I aspire to? I'm in a role that I never even thought was possible or even existed. I was fortunate that, I ran Proactiv, a billion-dollar company. I'm an operating advisor for private equity. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm the C200 board chair. But these are things I never thought possible until I saw other women that were in these types of roles. Mm-hmm. And I thought, why did I spend all of those years in corporate? And especially when corporate was done for me and when I was done with it, what would I do next? And I was so fortunate that there were role models that really helped me along the way to just even know that these positions existed. So when you say, did I know I'd ever be here? No, and it never ends. It's a continued effort. There's so much I want to
do. These are questions that we all ask one another, and so I'm thankful that you're putting it out in the open, so the rest of us are comfortable asking those questions to ourselves and to other people. So thanks, Kimber. That's great. Ivy, how about you? Did you think that you would be in the same role? Is this what you expected?
So I think I would build on what Kimber said. I certainly did not expect that the end role or a role I could get into would be a chief culture officer position, because
Well, that didn't exist at the time, right?
That's absolutely right, Dara. These are increasingly new roles for many organizations. And I think when you're still starting out in your career, it's really more about aspiring, I think, to do something that impacts people. At least for me, it was about, can I do something great where I obtain mastery myself, where I impact my company or impact people in a way that's positive. I think I was also more concerned about stretching myself, doing something that was intellectually interesting, that I was learning and growing. And then the way to this role was really just a bit of a zigzag, and I'm sure we'll get into it. But certainly this is not a script I could have written for myself at the start of my career.
Well, none of us can write the script. We'd like to write the script, but we just can't possibly project into the future. But can I do something great? I think that all of us would like to address that to our up and coming women in terms of how do we respond to, can I do something great? So I'm so glad you said that. Hold that thought, Ivy. Jennifer, how about you? What did you think that you would be in this role? I mean, wow, look what you've done.
So I'll actually take the baton from Ivy. I think even 20 years into my career, that was probably a decade ago, I wouldn't have said that I aspired to be a CEO, but I knew, I think maybe like Kimber, I was, and stuck is the wrong word. I had a very vibrant corporate career for a long time, but I knew I wanted to have more impact.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to have more influence. I wanted to have more freedom to set the vision, to set the strategy, to inspire a team to achieve it. And I felt like it was just hard from the positions that I found myself in the large corporate publicly traded space.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew I wanted to be in the C-suite so I could have more of that impact. And it meant, being at that decision table at a higher level. And at the stage of my career, 20 years in, I looked around in the publicly traded corporate world and I said, it's going to be hard for me to get there from here.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually chose to step away, and this may be a little similar to Kimber's story. I stepped away from large public companies and I went to the SMB, the small, medium-sized business space, private equity backed, where I could take my skills that I had developed previously as a business unit leader, but now I could apply them as a CEO.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of surprises, but I think the education I got in the publicly traded corporate world related to P&L management supported me in my first CEO job, but there were a whole lot of surprises and challenges I didn't expect. Mm-hmm. And I was very fortunate to be in that small, medium-sized business space with a private equity board, helping guide me through some of the bigger challenges around things like working capital or board engagement, or even inspiring and rallying a team.
I love that. And I think that surprises are part of what we all have to contend with, right? I mean, that is part of it. And surprises are not easy at times. You were brave. You were a trailblazer at your time. And I think our next generation of leaders would love to hear more about how to make an impact. I think we're all thinking about it, and our next generation leaders are prioritizing making impact. So thanks, that's terrific.
Hey, Dara, before you move on, because I just wanted to underscore something Jennifer said that I think will be, thematically a conversation, because I don't think women are often encouraged to express ambition and the clarity and the vision for their own lives. And I really want to admit that even as a young girl, I was very ambitious, and I remain ambitious.
Love it.
And I think you have to own that. You have to feel squarely comfortable in your skin despite the reactions of people around you. The energy, the drive has always been there for me. Now, I don't know how much of that is innate or nurtured, but I think encouraging women to really feel okay with ambition, feel okay with energy, and not to make that an aberration or something that's just unusual for women. So I just wanted to layer it on that point.
I am glad you did. I'm with you. I think that we are all in that same boat. We want to encourage ambition. Thank you for bringing that up, Ivy. That's a really, really important point to remember. So I'd love to, let me move on to the next question for all of you. And we're going to start with Jennifer on this question. Jennifer, did you have a mentor or a sponsor, or I should say mentors or sponsors, plural, at any point in your career? And how did they inform your career development?
Yeah, I've actually had both, and I'm glad you used those two words. I actually distinguish between them, and we at Linkage actually teach what effective sponsorship looks like, because women are so over mentored and under sponsored. And I'll give you my specific example of how it's impacted my career. But just to distinguish a little bit, we believe that mentors are the ones who are going to kind of hold your hand. They're going to point you to the door. They're going to say, you see that door? I've walked through that door before. Here's what you need to know. Here's what you have to watch out for. Go. Sponsors, however, they're going to walk you to the door. They're going to open it. They're going to make sure you come out the other side victorious. And even if you're not through that door and they're going to fight for you. So let's talk sponsors for a moment. Most of my sponsors, and I think it's hard to rise to the C-suite without them, especially as a woman. Most of them were white men.
Okay.
Or white women who didn't look like me. They didn't have, I've got 3 kids, they didn't have a family, or if they did, their spouse stayed home. But that was okay, because they believed in me and they helped me open doors along the way. And I'll tell a quick story of Melody Jones. She was in a position of power and influence, kind of actually the head of HR at my previous company. And she helped me build my business case for the promotion to managing director. I couldn't have been a BU leader without that promotion. And then when the company was bought, she helped me craft a way to exit gracefully with a financial package that would help set me up for my next role. Since then, she's no longer in a position of power and influence in my current role, but she's become a mentor. She's given my name to recruiters and coached me through other CEO candidate opportunities. She's guided me through 13 years of really important career decisions. And because of all that, I invited her to become the second woman on our board of directors, so that she could impact the entire company along with me.
Everybody needs a Melody. Everybody needs a Melody. And I would say that Linkage is lucky to have her on your board.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. That's great. And I'm really glad that you shared that experience. Her name will live in infamy. Kimber, I'd love to hear from you about your experience with mentors or sponsors and how they really informed your development.
Well, it's interesting because, my story is a little different than Jennifer's, because I grew up in a home where I really didn't have role models in the family. I was the first to graduate. I was the baby of 5, first to graduate from college. So there really not, business people for me to see in my home or when I grew up. But as I escalated in my career, and as Ivy said, I always had that drive, always had that motivation, always wanted to be in business. And I look back and there were role models all along the way. I'm not sure I knew they were there. I think of, as I wanted to grow in my career and go to the next level, there was always somebody that said to me, Kimber, you should think about this. You have these qualifications. You can do this. And it wasn't that I didn't want it. I always wanted it. I just thought that I would be asked. I didn't know I had to ask for it.
Right.
I was waiting for it to come to me. And
right.
It was these mentors and sponsors that said to me, hey, you're the person. Don't doubt yourself. And I was like, I don't even doubt myself. But they're like, no one's going to ask you. Go ahead and apply for this or move into that next role. So I now later on in life, I wish I had known younger to pay attention to those.
I was just going to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah, to pay attention to those kinds of things. And now I know later in life, and I appreciate it and giving back. I'm making sure that I'm a mentor and a sponsor for other women and even men, because it's important, because I didn't know about it along the way. And I want to make sure that I get back in that area.
I think that, first of all, the rest of us all really appreciate it. And I am wondering and would not be surprised if you are not the only one in this group in our audience who had a similar experience, who did not have obvious role models. And that would be really interesting to look at. I mean, do you ask for a mentor? Do you ask for a sponsor? I mean, these are really, really interesting questions to ask ourselves and for us to help guide other people now that we're at this point in our career. So that's a really good story, Kimber. And also, I'm sure you'll all agree, super interesting. We're 4 different people here, hearing different experiences that all worked. So that's really helpful. Ivy, would love to hear from you about your experience with mentors or sponsors and how they really impacted your career development.
I think very much in agreement with Kimber and Jennifer that, you know, you need both and you need them for very different reasons. I think, you know, especially as a Black female in sort of corporate settings, I had to get very quickly comfortable with, you know, just being the only one or being one of very few. And I think for many people of color, this is just a normal experience. And navigating that singularity in a way that really helps you stand out in the right way is something that I think mentors were very instrumental in my career, right? And I think the piece that I'm encouraging our emerging leaders to sort of pay attention to is sometimes I think people get so wrapped up in a one-on-one relationship, a mentoring relationship. And I think the way I approached my career, Dara, was really situational mentoring. I view myself as a relentless learner. I'm always curious. And if somebody has spades on a topic that I'm interested in, I don't mind going in just on that particular topic. Can you help me understand how you're looking at this subject, right? Because I think when you get too wrapped up in just having this one-on-one long-term relationship, I think sometimes you're not availing yourself to the multitude of perspectives and people around you that can actually be very instrumental in your career shaping if you're not only bent out on meeting them entirely all the time, right? So I would mention situational mentoring because that's how I've really managed my career. But sponsorship was a game changer for me. And I think I'm now willing to sort of reveal the names of my sponsors at this stage. I would not be here but for Evan Greenberg, who happens to be the chairman of Chubb. I encountered Evan at an earlier stage in my career. I had the boldness to latch onto him. And I was really looking for an opportunity to work out of the Bermuda operation into the US operation. And I remember him saying to me, hang on, like, this is a very bizarre question. Most people want to move to Bermuda. Nobody wants to leave Bermuda. So there's something really strange and wrong about you. And it was a humorous conversation.
Not strange and not wrong.
It started though the making, I think, of that sponsorship relationship because I gave him my reasons and really the rest is history. I think the piece also that Jennifer talked about is, which I would add, is mentors talk to you, sponsors talk about you. Because decisions are often made behind closed doors. That's the experience. And even when we're working virtually, they're made in small virtual spaces. So the locus of power and dynamics of power in many organizations is still predominantly white and male. So when you're thinking about sponsoring, it's thinking about people who have access to influencing and shaping decisions. And usually that's a smaller group of people. So again, a big nod to my chairman, Evan, because I would not be here but for his sponsorship. Now, of course, you have to do all the other variables. And I obviously give him credit, but I know that it took a lot of work on my end because you have to be deserving of sponsorship, right? You have to make sure like you really are rising to the bar of that expectation.
Dara, can I just, I said something really important and you started it, Dara, by saying can we as women seek out mentors? Can we seek out sponsors?
Yes.
Seeking out mentorship at any stage of your career, whether it's an aspiration in your career or a significant challenge you're having in career and life, is a little easier. Once you find that network and get access to those people or ask someone to introduce you to those people, seeking out sponsorship is harder because of what Ivy said. She said, I latched myself onto Evan, but what did it take? It took building credibility. It took building trust. It took being very clear on her aspiration to move from one part of the business to another, one geography to another. And I think over time, my guess, Ivy, is Evan was willing to say, I've got you. And now I am going to ensure that you are successful. But she had to put in the work to earn that sponsorship, if you will.
I think that is such a good point. I was going to bring up the same thing. And I really would like to highlight the theme of situational mentorship and seeking that out, which, by the way, to people who don't have a mentor, you don't have to say, will you be my mentor? This is not a storybook. This is about building relationships and asking for advice, asking for counsel. And in terms of sponsorship, you're absolutely right, Jen, that we have to do the work, but there's some give and take, and certainly giving on the sponsorship part too. So I think your point is very well taken. I'd love to move on to our third question rather, and we're going to start with Ivy on this third question. And this is we'll be really interested to hear from you on this. Were there specific experiences that you pursued along your journey, or conversely, were there experiences that you wished that you had pursued?
So yes, absolutely. And Dara, thanks for allowing us time for reflection, because I really wanted to make sure I covered this with some clarity. I think learning the business would be the first piece of experience that I was very deliberate. Whichever company I worked for, to be honest, and it's not like I have like a long history of so many companies behind me,
right.
But I've often felt like you have to buckle down and learn the business. I think the piece about that's different is most people learn the side of the business that they're on. So if you're an HR leader, you're deep on HR. If you're in finance, you're deep on finance. If you're marketing, you're deep on marketing. But really having the discipline to really learn the aggregate business. And that takes time. And that's not easy, because some of the subject areas are way above my ability to understand, and buckling down and really paying attention to that experience. The other experience that I was very deliberate in getting is having a cultural experience out of my own country. And I think, to me, that was probably the influence of my parents, because my parents traveled. I was always keen to live outside my country. And I just felt that having a point of view about the world and the connectivity of the world makes you, think about issues a little bit differently. Now, it's not, granted, it's probably not for everyone. It's the way I built myself. I have lived in 5 different countries, and I think that makes me think very differently about the problems in front of me. And then I think that, there's 2 others, learning the numbers, I have to say, was also not intuitive to me. But I do remember when I took a stint in the business and really going through the balance sheet of the company and really going line item by line item to understand when we are calculating loss ratios, when we look at actuarial triangles. I mean, I was one of those first kids to drop math. And little did I realize, oh my God, I really need to be numerate, and I need to understand how this company really does top line and bottom line growth. So I would say that's an experience, a discipline I put myself through. And then the last one, which goes on continuously, Dara, you mentioned building relationships. Yes. And I think building relationships has been key, though. The piece I would state a little differently is most people build relationships because they want something. I would encourage you to build relationships for the sake of really having a variety of relationships that you can leverage over time. Because I think when you come to if I say to Jennifer, can you do me a favor and let's talk about this, versus like, tell me who you are. Where do you come from, Jennifer? Right. That's a different relationship versus one that's needs or wants based. So building relationships that are not necessarily self-gratifying immediately, mm-hmm. I think that's also another sort of discipline that I really take to heart.
I appreciate that, Ivy. And I'd also like to add about building relationships. It simply makes your life richer too. So it makes your life richer. It makes us happier and broad-based thinkers too, which helps the other things that you're trying to do, the learning deliberately and understanding different cultures. So no, I appreciate that. Jennifer, I want to ask you the same thing about the specific experiences that you pursued along the way, or conversely, experiences that you wish you had pursued.
Yeah, and I'll take a little bit of a different tact than, Ivy's experiences are kind of guiding principles that I would love to continue to adopt for my entire career and life. I'll just offer two very specific moments in time that might be applicable for our audience. And the first is grabbing the opening when you see it.
Okay.
As I mentioned, I was
seizing the moment.
and if you are paying attention and are a little brave and courageous, you'll see these moments across the course of your career. For me, it was a very pivotal experience 12 years ago. So it was the middle of the last recession. And there was a lot of change going on in the organization, a lot of downsizing, voluntary severance packages. And my boss said, "You're not eligible for the package. You are staying here, like it or not." I was needed in my role, which was managing a product portfolio for the business unit. But I looked around and noticed that the leader of the business was not being replaced. And so I went to my boss and I said, "I would love to stay at the organization, but I want to move from my functional role, managing a budget, to a business unit role, managing the business." And I didn't know at the time that would give me an executive MBA on the job. Now, all of a sudden, I'm not managing the P&L all the way to the net income line, but I am managing it to the gross margin line. And I've got to interact with finance and strategy. And I've got managers of managers now reporting to me. That experience that went on for 5 or 6 years really shifted the course of my career, where then I could move into more and more senior general management roles, and then ultimately a CEO role. So I think that's the first thing, was like find those opportunities and seize that experience, or those experiences when you see them. You need to make sure it aligns with what your vision for your career and your life is. So that was first. The second one, and this is a completely different. In 2018, when this company was purchased by another, I knew that my role as the business unit general manager was not going to be as valued anymore. And it was the moment that I decided that I wanted to step away from the publicly traded corporate world into a smaller organization, but I had no idea. Do I want to go to a startup? Do I want to go to private equity back? Do I want to go to a nonprofit? And because I didn't know, I stopped. And I took, for the first time in 25 years, I took a self-imposed sabbatical. It went on for 8 months. And I knew I needed to gain clarity on what I wanted. And the mantra that I said it was incredibly uncomfortable for me. I was used to working a ridiculous amount in a pretty high pressure environment for 25 years. And I said, every day when I get up, I'm going to do one thing for my body. I'm going to do one thing for my spirit. And I'm going to do one thing for my job search. And sometimes it was, connecting with a relationship and just talking. Sometimes it was having very intense, 2 or 3 meetings about possibilities. But about 90 days into it, I started getting more clarity. Another 90 days, I started honing in on kind of that middle market CEO or number 2 or C-suite space. And in the next 30 to 60 days, I pursued the job offer that I have now. Had I not stopped and really been intentional, I'm sure I would have jumped at another, not C-level job, but a senior level role in a publicly traded company. And I would have missed the opportunity to be a CEO for the last 4 years.
Jen, that's terrific. And a general theme as I'm looking back at some of the notes that I took on the first question that I asked you, you're not afraid to put yourself out there. We all have fears. There's no question. Anyone who says that they are not fearful is not telling the truth. But you're brave and you've put yourself out there even when you're uncomfortable. And so that is an excellent message to share with our audience. So thank you. Kimber, I'd love to hear from you about specific experiences that you've pursued along the way, especially given the fact that the role models did not come from inside your home. I think that your response will be particularly interesting, or experiences that perhaps you should have, or maybe you wish that you had pursued along the way.
Well, I love what both Ivy and Jennifer have said, because it's about being deliberate. And one of the things I learned early on was inserting myself into areas that were not even my role. So if I think Ivy had shared that she went and took a look at, the P&L, the balance sheet and all that. I knew right away, you can tell if think with the end in mind. If you want to be in the C-suite, you're going to need to know a lot how to run a P&L. You're going to need to know the numbers of a company and the performance of a company. So if you insert yourself and ask to be in certain meetings, ask to be in certain areas, you'll start to learn just by being in those meetings and being aware, or even asking people to show you how this works. No one's going to come to you and say, hey, let me sit down with you and show you our finances, our P&L. No one's going to do that. So, I learned early on to do that. And I have to tell you, every situation that I did it, every experience I had always pushed me to the next level. And it's really because I put myself in situations. One of the things that I think is important is, looking at your career as a timeline. So when you say, what are some of the experiences, when we sold Proactiv to Nestle, here I was in my 50s and I said, I've always wanted to work for a Fortune 500 company. This is fantastic. And when I sat with the Nestle team and, we were working on if I was moving to Switzerland or not, they said to me, why did you wait till now? Like, why didn't you come work for us when you were younger? Because I said, I don't know if I want to do this at this age. And I thought, why didn't I? Nestle is a company that's been around. I could have always went and worked for them. And there were people who'd been there 20, 30 years. So if you want something, do it early on and think that it does have a timeline. You really, you need to push it. Don't sit and wait for it to happen, because if you want it, go for it and insert yourself.
And Kimber, I will say, but Dara, to your point of, it may look like, all of us now in retrospect looked really brave and courageous. I wasn't going to take this job 4 years ago until two white male peers sat me down at lunch separately and said, if I think I can do this job, why don't you think you can do this job? Why are you waiting to be I literally had a mental model of, I can't be a CEO until I have CEO experience. Well, that's insane.
Right. How many times have we heard that? Right. I think that's really important. So I think I love your message. Don't be afraid to start young. If you want to pursue it. But I'm sure there's also a really important message, and exactly like you're saying now, Jen, if you want it at whatever time in your life, if it's the right thing, you still should pursue it. So I think that we can make an argument for both sides too, right?
Absolutely.
No question. I'd love to move on to the next one. And Kimber, we're going to start with you on this one. And interesting, we polled our audience, and this next question was a recurring theme. What were some of the lessons that you learned in your career? And we've talked about some of these. And is there anything that you could have done to avoid some of the challenges that you faced?
That's a good question, right? Because throughout, everybody on here could say there's a million, I can't even pick one, right? There's so many challenges and things that you come up against. But one of the things that I've done is you have to learn from every challenge, right? And sometimes you forget what's actually happened or what the scenario was and how you overcame it. I have someone who I guess I could call as a mentor. He has a book, he calls it A Book of Horrible Things. And it's really a journal, and he writes down like all these terrible things that have happened and how he's overcome them. And I started keeping a journal. I like to think of mine in the positive aspect of it, of things I've overcome in my lifetime. And if you write them out and you start to look at them, you think, you know what? First of all, you can always reflect back and think, I can get past this because I've done it before. And this challenge is easy. But you start to see, well, you know what? I remember how I tackled that challenge and I can do this. So I highly recommend it. When someone mentioned it to me, I thought it was crazy. And it's something that really, really helps. And, you know, when I say lessons learned, I just want to add one thing. If you don't learn them from those experiences and those challenges, they'll follow you wherever you go.
That's right.
And you think they're going to go away. You think it just happens to be that incident, but they will follow you. And until you learn how to deal with them and move past them,
Right.
then you're not going to overcome them. So that's why I keep a little log just to make sure I'm reminded of that.
Would you call challenges also mistakes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And you go back and you say, wow, how did that even happen? You know, because you do want to do a root cause, right?
Right.
We're business people. What's the root cause of it? How did it happen? And then when you learn, you know, you never want to do it again. And that's what makes you a great leader, is if you learn from those mistakes, you learn from those challenges. And then the other thing is sharing them with people. And
I was
saying, "Look,
about to say,
here's a situation I had.
I did
And-
this. Right.
Exactly. And
Mhm.
usually they'll relate and go, oh my gosh, I didn't know it was so bad. Like, you did that? I can't believe you did that.
Right.
So you can really help other people.
And hello, how about welcome to the human race too? Right? I mean, really.
Exactly. We're all real people, right?
Right, exactly. Ivy, how about you? What were some of the lessons that you learned in your career, and how could you have perhaps avoided either some of these, we'll call them challenges, that's a very nice word, or some of these mistakes that you made? We all make them.
Yeah. So look, I there are no regrets in my backstory, because I think everything has actually led to every point forward, right? So
Yeah.
I sort of don't look at it in with a regretful eye, but I think I will say, I've always been drawn to building roles. So what I'm probably not the best maintainer of anything, but what has always been interesting to me is sort of have white space roles, you know, a role that really invites building something for a company or a group, or for whatever time period the company is going through. And so the lessons there are always numerous, right? I think one of the lessons that I would bring forward is great execution is a function of very detailed and long-standing relationships. Because when you're executing across a company, you actually need friends in various places. And so sometimes, you know, I was in the middle of an execution project and it's like, I wish I knew Kimber, because she would kind of pick up my calls. Because sometimes you wonder, why do some people execute so flawlessly?
Right.
They've done the due diligence, the homework to get that quick reaction from people. So I would say that's also a very good lesson, not to look at it just technically, but really look at it as the relationships that serve the technical execution of what you're doing. The other lesson I would say is go where you're loved. I have to say, Dara, to me, that's one that I would cast my career differently. Because I think many of us try to stick ourselves in teams and with groups where, you know, we really do struggle. And I think especially as a Black female, this is something I'm rethinking, right?
Yes.
But I think if you can try to find places that love you, and I don't mean of love in a, you know, romantic way, I'm just saying, so a place that gets you, that really understands and really can provide what you need to thrive. Because I think sometimes you spend too much time trying to make a situation work that invariably actually doesn't serve you very well. So I think I would have been faster at uprooting myself from teams or groups that do not love me, and just be relentless about finding that soil that actually I could thrive in. I would say that would be a lesson forward.
I so appreciate that. And one of our colleagues actually just sent me a message to highlight, go where you're celebrated and not tolerated. What an important lesson. Go where we're loved, go where we're celebrated. I mean, if you have to work that hard, it is not a good fit. And so I'm so glad that you said that out loud, Ivy. That's really important for our audience to hear. Jennifer, how about you? What were some of the lessons that you've learned, and how might you have avoided them?
So I'm going to go to a lesson very early in my career, but before I do, as I'm listening to the Go Where You Loved theme, it reminds me so much of the work that we've been doing at Linkage around what does it mean to be an inclusive organization and an inclusive leader, and what you're both saying. One of the most important things is that leaders in the organization honor and celebrate and use the unique strengths, the unique gifts of the people who work for them. So when Ivy's talking, whether it's race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation as uniqueness, but even equally as Ivy's talking, it's my ability to see white space and innovate. I'm hearing that as a uniqueness. Is that celebrated? Is that loved? And that's one piece of it. And then the other piece is, do I feel like I belong?
Right.
You know, do I feel like I'm accepted in my uniqueness? And I will say, like, in my I've had an incredible career in the corporate world before I jumped over to the private equity world. But in my last role, I didn't feel loved and I didn't feel honored and I didn't feel like I belonged. And it was soul sucking to the point where my husband looked at me at one point and said, we need to get our mom back. Like, you're looking at all the kids and me, he's like, you know, you are not who you are meant to be in this job. And that was kind of the trigger I needed to just get out. Back to my early challenges, I think, look, you know, starting my career in the 1990s, the challenges were really, I mean, they're more nuanced today. We haven't eradicated them, but I was dealing with from sexual harassment to complete inequity in pay to, I remember going into the office of my boss and saying, I don't understand why I'm in the same role as the person you're bringing in from Spain. And yet you're going to give him the office with the window and I'm stuck in the cubby. I must be doing something wrong. And at that moment, I uncontrollably started sobbing.
Yeah.
And I mean, it wasn't my finest moment, but I just realized like it was bothering me. So I was pretty activist in those days of like asking the questions, not necessarily making demands, but I just didn't get it. Like, why can't women wear pants here? Like at the Coca-Cola company growing up, women weren't really allowed to wear pantsuits. Okay, so fast forward, we could all tell stories about that.
Yes.
I think I love the word that Ivy used at the beginning around ambition. And like, this might be a little contrarian, but I think one of the biggest challenges and biggest mistakes that I made is that I was overly ambitious and fought really hard to, you know, either get myself into position, maybe not making the best of friends along the way, but also just believing that if I worked harder and harder and harder, you people are going to notice and you are going to promote me and I am going to make it. And the result was I just worked really, really hard and maybe a lot harder than like men in similar roles. And they were getting promoted equally, if not faster. So my learning lesson, looking back on 30 years now, I feel like in my role today, I am my most authentic self. I do feel like I belong, and I probably have the best sense of balance than in any role I've ever had before, which is a little bit ironic given that now I'm in the senior role. So my learning lesson is I would probably work less hard at my ambition. I would focus more on a broader aspiration and inspire and ask people to help me along the way. I think I did too much. I think I wasted a lot of time working too hard and expecting people to notice. It's kind of like the Alexander Hamilton, you know, with Aaron Burr's, you know, telling him to talk less and smile more. I think I would do less and I would engage more.
I think that we are all learning from our experiences and time. You know, time is a healer and it's an improver. So I appreciate that. We are about at our time. I wanted to ask, you know, as a wrap up, but I don't think we're going to have time, but I'd love to hear one person have a sound bite. You know, perhaps Kimber, you can give us a sound bite as we rethink the pathways of our emerging women. What advice might we give our emerging colleagues? Maybe you can give us a sound bite that'll help us kind of wrap things up.
I'll give you a great sound bite. Find a peer community at a young age. Find other women, find other men, a community that is going to help you, that's going to be a great support system, and recognize it and build that network early. And again, it's not about networking, it's about relationships.
Excellent.
And that's what I would say to everybody who is in our audience. It's the most important thing. And unfortunately, a lot of us said we didn't learn it until later on in our careers. That the time is to learn it early in your careers when you're at that manager level, that entry level position. And if you want to be in the C-suite, get those relationships and community going. Find time for it. That's the key, finding time.
I think
Make
that is
time.
excellent advice for all of us that we can all take in. And it's our emerging women. It's the pathways to the C-suite. We can think and rethink, but that is the best. That is the best advice, to find your community and go with it and keep at it, and give yourself some grace to keep at it, and recognize that we all have a lot to offer and that we can make an impact. So thank you all very much. It was really a pleasure to be with you, just a true pleasure. And we really appreciate your insight. I see that Brittany's on with us, and I'm glad that you are, Brittany. Can you take it from here? And thanks for having us, Brittany.
Sure. What a powerful conversation. Dara, Ivy, Jennifer, Kimber, thank you so much for the insights that you shared today, to be bold, to be deliberate, to build relationships before we need them. And I think my favorite probably is to go where you're celebrated, not where you're tolerated. So thank you so much. We have about a 10-minute break, and we'll see you all in the next session.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending.